Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to our CIGA Ramadan webinar series. Today, in our 17th session, I have to welcome everyone joining us now, and also welcoming Dr. Hiba Raouf. With you, I'm Yumna Sulaiman. I'm CIGA Research Assistant. I have to welcome with everyone on behalf of CIGA, Dr. Hiba Raouf Azzat. She is Assistant Professor of Politics at Ibn Khaldun University, and here in Istanbul also, and she taught in many universities for many years, including Cairo University and also the American University in Cairo. I was one of her students as well, so welcome, my professor. Before joining Ibn Khaldun, she was also a fellow, visiting fellow at London School of Economics, and she is working at the Center of Alliance of Civilizations in Ibn Khaldun University. Besides political theory as the main field of her study, she wrote in other many fields, including global civil society, urban sociology, and Middle East politics. Welcome, Dr. Hiba Raouf, to our series, and Ramadan Mubarak for you and for everyone who is listening us now. She's going to start her session about technology, social distancing, and isolation, the challenge of alternative sociabilities. You can start, the floor is yours now, and then you will have about 15 minutes, inshallah, and then we can have our Q&As. For the end of the session, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you very much, Yumna. And thank you for CIGA for inviting me for this interesting series of webinar lectures that I have been following. It has been a very interesting collection of ideas and lectures and speakers. I actually chose this topic because I think it's very lively and it's very timely, and it's also very existential. So we are not talking about something that is extremely theoretical, very far away from the experience of everyone, but we're in the middle of it, all of us. So I wanted to both actually talk about some theoretical issues, but also address how we can imagine, how we can develop our imagination of the situation we are now in, as individuals, as communities, but also as humans in terms of global humanity at large, and what we are facing now from the sociological perspective. Because a lot has been written about the future economy, the political implications, the artificial intelligence, data mining, and how we are now facing different threats, as individuals regarding our privacy. Many things have been addressed, but they were focusing more on the macro level, and I wanted to bring it a bit more to the sociological perspective, but I will also talk about political implications. And I started actually by looking at the notion of sociability, because I'm interested in sociology and especially in urban sociology, so the micro level of sociology and how people basically move in the urban space and how people interact. And our everyday life, so the everyday life level, not the long duration or long durée as Rodel calls it. So I've been looking into the different dictionaries regarding what is sociability, because we're talking about distance, we are talking about social distance and distance socializing as well. So what is sociability? What is it that we are trying to capture as a meaning? Our ability to basically engage with the world, with sometimes even with ourselves, but this entails a lot of social circles that we are in. And I found actually in the lexicon and in the different dictionaries a link between sociability and a number of concepts that are actually very interesting and that form the circles around which basically most of us are now thinking. One thing is friendliness. So sociability is linked to friendliness, And of course, friendliness brings into the discussion friendships. And if you keep thinking, making comparison with our situation now, missing our friends or being a bit disappointed in friends who in this crisis did not check on us, or so this dimension of relations with the others and how they can take this form. And the second thing is cordiality. So the fact that you are sociable, it also relates to the emotional dimension, that you express your emotions in a positive way. And if you are not doing it in a positive way, you are antisocial. So it's like sociability is not just the mere interaction, but the interaction in a more civil way, or in directions of civility, engagement, compassion, etc. And conviviality, living together. So sociability is about living together and being able to manage this togetherness in a way. And also in the dictionary, it is related to neighbor relations. So also the spatial dimension of the closest circles of neighbors, not only the selected friends, and also enthusiasm, interestingly. So sociability is about enthusiasm, and we have been suffering from a sort of lack of motivation in a way. Some people say they sleep longer than usual. There is this dimension of enthusiasm because you engage with people, and for those who are interested in energy and energy healing, they know better about the issues of that actually engagement with people raises your motivation and enthusiasm, especially if you are in a positive energy environment. And then last but not least, which is very interesting as well, related to the meaning itself, to the language, which is adaptability. So I think these dimensions somehow give us an understanding of, when we say socializing, what we mean. Sociability of the individual and socializing with others, they indicate all these dimensions. But now we are suffering from social distancing. So we are told we have to keep ourselves locked in our homes to protect our existence, to survive. And we are also thinking about maybe we are not completely distant, but we are socializing in a different way. So you'll find a lot of articles online talking about this is not social distancing, actually this is distant socializing. Because social distancing, as it developed in sociological writings, was basically focusing on imposed social distancing, or more of relations between races. At one point at the beginning of the 20th century, especially in American sociology, when it had to do with race, apartheid, keeping a social distance. So the history of the notion is actually not very much relevant to what we are in. I mean, it had implications in other times differently. But also how we socialize is related very much, and this is relevant to our situation now, related to space. It's not only about the mental state, it's not only about the psychological state, it's not about the willingness to socialize, but space has a very important factor in that. In which spaces do we socialize, and how places accommodate a degree of socialization. You can socialize very well outside your own home, but inside your own home you feel somehow detached from those around you, though this is supposed to be home. And you can also socialize with people across distances by using technology, which will bring us to the notion of technology and its importance. But we need to make this distinction between socializing from a distance and distant and the social distance, because the notion of social distance has always been addressed in city and in the metropolis and in urban sociology writings, because since Marx introduced the notion of alienation, it has been true that we have been increasingly researching and examining somehow how we can live in a very busy community or very busy streets or in our day-to-day life while commuting and being mobile in the city. We are in the midst of such a big crowd, but at the same time we feel extremely lonely. So this is actually something that needs attention. Our sense of proximity and distance is very important because it has to do with the urban planning. And by the way, when we are talking about the internet, when we are talking about the cyberspace, the virtual space, it is considered to be part of the urban sociology. For many writers, they have been actually classifying this as part of urban sociology and very much related to the cities, either us becoming more into technology and communication technology and even up to artificial intelligence tools, etc. But also how the cities that we are living in have been increasingly technologized. So we're talking about smart cities. We're not talking about just the cities. Cities and more are getting smarter, but this being smart does not need necessarily to be sociable as well, because it can be smart in the case of China and the rising interest in how the Chinese have been using the technology to basically survey, and surveillance has been basically what was and how to govern, not basically how to facilitate through technology how people socialize. Since the beginning of the 20th century, a lot of sociologists actually have been interested in the dimension of space, place, and technology. And maybe Georg Simmel, the German sociologist, has been one of the very prominent names in this regard, and quite early, at the very beginning of the 20th century, as early as 1908, he started publishing about space and how space is very important for us, and how society and sociological dimensions should be contextualized within spaces and dimensions, proximities and distances. And it's not only about the intention of the individual or the nature of the social system, but it's also about the nature of the space and the distance. And he brought into the understanding the notion of the geometry of social forms, and this was basically formal sociology in a way, as it was called. But it was not only about that. It was not only that he looked at the forms and he said, regardless of the nature of the relations inside, there are forms of social interaction. So the formal approach, but also he was very much aware as well of the mental dimension. So he wrote about the metropolis and mental life. And he was aware that in the metropolis, in the city, there is something related to an aspect of space and distance, and an aspect of how we interact that affects actually our mental life in a great deal. And he was followed by other sociologists who actually talked about the same thing, like Park and Burgess in the 20s, and then we had Mumford in the 20s and 30s, basically talking about the techne and civilization, and how technology is basically causing more and more alienation quite early, at the beginning of the 20th century. And then we had Jacques Ellul talking about, again, the technology and its impact on our language, its impact on our social interaction. We had Heidegger talking about space and place and the dimensions of being, but also talking about technology and how it is a medium. This was, we assume that people started talking about technology and existence and being and social interactions when the internet started. This is not true. They were interested right from the beginning, since even we had the different technologies of communication in the early stages of the 20th century. So being sociable and being a social being, a social being and sociable is also something that we have to take into consideration, because there are voices that are saying that we are not social. It's like this is imposed by society and by culture, and we can actually live individualistic, detached, from in an individualistic manner, detached from our community, and pick and choose basically what we want to do. It's not very uncommon to hear now during this lockdown that people say we can work from home, but we miss our outings. So it's working from home is a different thing than socializing, because people think that they can achieve while working at home, saving the commuting, saving time that is spent in within situations that they did not choose when they move in the city. But at the same time, they didn't say, and we can live at home as well. Though we are basically now locked down, we are buying our things from the internet. Things are delivered to your home. We don't go out. There was a full lockdown in places like India, like Jordan. Jordan achieved a lot, by the way, in this regards, and they have for I think 12 days now they had 0 cases. But in other places you can see that people are just waiting for the 2-3 hours, even in places like Spain, in countries like Spain, where it has been like the number of cases has been booming and rising. They still allow people to go out, and by observation in different cities, looking at the internet, but also talking to friends, we realize that people are keen to socialize. They go, it's not just funny and sweet, that they go into the balconies and go out and want to play guitar or talk to each other from balconies, etc. But it shows the urge to socialize, even if people are now saying, why do we have to go 5 days a week to the office? We can start now like splitting the week. And there would be calls also from environmentalists regarding this issue, because it's just everyone saw what was going on in the environment, etc. And also how how we can manage the city in a better way to guarantee a more humane interaction in the city, if we might just manage to look at time and space and somehow make an arrangement of making time and space leading to more sociability in the city, away from the very crowded streets, etc. There has been a lot of that going on now, especially not only in our social sciences, but also in urban planning and in city management circles. So this is one of the things that I wanted to start talking about. The second thing is, if we look at our own experience, the experience of being locked down, what is more important than just socializing and making Zoom meetings and going to webinar, etc. The human being generally, when we look at the pillars, the foundations of our sociability, our ability to socialize from a distance or closely, it's actually related to our need to be together. And together and alone actually need to be explored as categories of thinking, because sometimes it is said that we are in the wider social life together, but people can be very much alone. And the rising number of people suffering generally in our modern age from depression, even leading to some countries considering adding psychiatrists, medical services to the NHS, for example, or to the National Health Services and Security, etc., means that there is an issue that we have been dealing with for the last century or so that needs to be addressed. People feel the distance, even without the pandemic, even without the lockdown. There is a whole debate in sociology and psychology about the distance and how we socialize and how the distance affects our socializing. And even some of my students, when they feel depressed, I ask what's wrong with you, and especially international students, and they say, I'm not able to manage my relations with friends and with even sometimes even couples when they separate because someone is studying, someone is working somewhere else, etc. So remote relations and relations from a distance are not manageable for everyone, and sometimes the relation itself collapses because of distance. So though technology helps us a lot to bridge that distance, to bridge the gap, it is in itself problematic. Why? If I can see your face, Yumna, on the screen every day, if you call me by phone, if we have a Zoom meeting, if we meet on webinar, why do we still feel that there is something that is missing? Because the bodily and the physical is very much, and the mobility and the movement of the body is very important actually for socialization and for sociabilities, and we can take it one step by the other. I mean, it's not only about seeing you in person, seeing the dimensions. I mean, different technologies have been trying to make the images much clearer, etc. But at the end of the day, it's not like seeing with your own eyes. And those who are interested in photography know very well that no matter how beautiful the picture is, it's not like seeing it with your own eyes. You know, what you see is actually completely different, even if you add everything to it. Because it's also about the environment, it's about the atmosphere, it's about the situation you are in. So seeing people, facing them, looking at their reactions and the body language, etc., via the flat screen is different from being engaged. The bodily dimension is very important. I'm personally a hugger, so people who like hugging are the ones who are suffering from this lockdown more. But I found out, because many of the ideas I'm bringing to this meeting are actually also based on going back to read about things that I started feeling, and I found a lot of literature on that. So touching and physical interaction is actually very important in the relations, and all the dimensions that we discussed when we were talking about sociability, friendliness, cordiality, conviviality, neighborhood, etc. Touching is very important, even in times of peace and war. You know, people can sometimes show that they don't like a person by the way they shake hands. You know, it's not intimate. You don't put the other hand on his hand. You know, while you are shaking his hand. No, it's just like from the you touch by fingers, basically. I mean, it's not a proper shake hand. It tells a story. It tells a reaction. It tells what you feel. It tells you yourself. You sometimes discover what you feel when you are hesitant to approach closer. So you say, it must be something in my heart, or I don't really like this person, or etc. So this touching and this physical interaction is very important for human sociability, and it's not enough to simply put through messages as if language is a thread between two people, and it's just you are putting it back and forth. You know, no, it's the interaction, the physical interaction that counts. The hugging, the kissing, the shaking of hands, the proximity. Of course, also when you are too close, some people don't feel comfortable, and this also reflects the degree of sociability, but also the degree of closeness to yourself, that the person is, some people you keep a distance with, some people you don't keep a distance. So it shows a lot. So distance matters for us, and that's why we are reflecting about it when we are locked down now, because this proximity and the touching and the physical interaction are actually very important. The second thing is as I said, the visual, and this visual has got a lot of layers as well. So I can see you, but I cannot feel you on the screen. Sometimes I need to see you in person in order to feel you, and the visual has been transformed by so many levels. To the extent that we, even in geography now, in human geography, they talk about deep maps. These are not the flat maps of cartography that we are used to, that are very important, and I will refer to the importance of maps, but also the deep maps of multimedia and the different levels of interactive maps and different technologies that has been introduced to mapping. Mapping is also a very important language, not only the language of images or the body language or the language of words and letters, but also how to read a map, but also how to read a city. So you'll find this reading and the fact that I don't only look at individuals, I read them as well. And in the classic wisdom, in different civilizations, we have been talking about reading humans as well. You know, you read the face, you read the body language. Some people can do that right from the first instance, and some people it takes them years to really be able to read the person and how the person basically, how his map of mind is functioning. So I think this is important. Language matters as well. The fact that we talk to each other, when it is done via a medium, it's completely different. And though McLuhan has written about in media studies, the very famous book, The Medium is the Message, you know, there has been a lot of research done on that, and the fact that our language now basically is corroding. We can talk, of course, when we are at the same time online. We talk to each other in different languages, in different ways. The content of the language is different. It can be a very formal meeting. It can be just a chit chat between families. Families, by the way, started using Zoom, not only Skype, because they think that Zoom can join much more people. And we started, in my case, having a big family gathering online where 50 people joined, you know, from my family in Cairo. And we were thinking, why didn't we think about it before? I mean, I have been out of my country for 4 years, and we have just been doing WhatsApp. So what is it that brought people to feel that in this moment, why don't we just gather and see our faces on the screen? This is important. But also in terms of language, there are so many studies talking about the corrosion of language because of the medium, and the inability of people, even when they talk, to be able to conversate, but also to negotiate, because of the many uses of language that have been overlapping in our life with different medium, in different positions, in different situations. So our ability actually to depend on language in management of our relations is declining. And there are very interesting experts who have been giving this a lot of attention. Jacques Ellul quite early wrote about the humiliation of language, but also we have very important work recently about icons, about emojis, about memes, about how different forms were introduced to basically put through a message without the use of language, and how this will affect eventually our understanding of each other. Silence becomes a matter of high importance, because it's not only about communicating, but it's also how we somehow get used to our own silence. And isolation and lockdown do not necessarily mean being lonely. Being alone does not necessarily mean being lonely. And actually, some people started saying, we are not sure. At the beginning of the lockdown, everyone was saying, oh, we want to go out. I mean, is this going to last forever? You know. But now, some people, when they started going out, they said, are we really going to go out again to the massive number of people on the streets and the crowd and the rush hours? You know, it's like at the beginning, people started becoming traumatized by sitting at home. Now some people are getting to start worrying about going out to meet a lot of people. So the adaptability that is embedded in the meaning of sociability, as I referred to at the beginning of the talk, is actually very important. We learned a lot about how distancing can actually lead to adaptabilities of relations, of feelings, of uses of language, and also of uses of technology. So I was not a person who would like to do such meetings at all. I like to go and I like to travel to meet people. And I declined many Skype meetings, etc. I say, no, if I cannot attend that, someone else can attend. But now, when it is a necessity, then you start adapting to this way of talking to yourself on the camera, and on the screen, which is still uncomfortable, but you somehow adapt. So the adaptability and how this will affect our future relations and sociabilities, alternatives, sociabilities that we have now is also a matter to reflect and think of, because it also puts into question our understanding of the self. We discover our own self in different situations, and I think in the lockdown we have been thinking a lot about how precious some of our relations were, how important some of our circles were, and how problematic also some of our proximities are, especially with rising domestic violence in many societies, and the cases that we saw that highlight that there are problems that we need to address as society that have been sort of under the carpet, pushed under the carpet in a way. And now during the lockdown, distance, proximity, safety, and sociability are at stake actually. So I think this is also something that is very important. Our life is not only our social life, and sociability is not only confined to the social relations that we have. Workplaces also are very important realm of our sociability. You have your colleagues, you have your colleagues at the university if you are studying, you have your colleagues at work. The workplace is also a social realm. And I think that one of the things that I personally noticed when we were doing Zoom meetings, and there was a very interesting video, someone did it, it's very funny. He was basically saying, what type of a Zoom person are you? The person like myself sitting and the living room is at the back, or the people who sit and there is a window at the back so their face is completely dark. I mean, you cannot see the face because of the light coming back from the window, so they can actually do things while you are not noticing the features. And the person who is walking during the Zoom meeting, so he cannot sit while he is communicating. And this is very sociable, by the way, because he was not used to talking to people while sitting. So he's acting actually more normally than others because he's just walking, And people who don't care to show in the back of the screen that people are moving, So he shows also the people who sit, and you find the mother passing by, or the father coming and looking, the old grandfather, and then not knowing what's going on, so he leaves, And this is actually going to break some ice in the workplace. When you go back home from home to your workplace, you would be seen differently, because people actually started laughing at such images, but also became much more acquainted with your background. They never entered your home, but now they know the background, and if the meetings are regular, like in our case of teaching on Zoom or webinar or different other platforms, people now know how our homes look, how your library looks. You change your place every lecture, so that it's not so monotonous, for you before being for the students. So it also broke some ice, and it introduced a different way of socializing. Some people are sitting, they will not be sitting wearing suits and ties, so they sit in more casual clothes. So though the distance is very far, they are sitting afar and they are using technology, but at the same time there is something social that started sort of creeping into the situation somehow, I hope it's not creepy, but it's coming into the relation. So the images and what we see, etc., is very important. The dimension of the aroma, the dimension of what we smell. People started realizing in the lockdown during the social distancing or the socializing from a distance, that when they sat at home, they started smelling things differently. In Egypt, everyone is talking about that. People in Alexandria started saying we can smell the sea because of the decrease in pollution. People in the city started saying we hear the birds. So dimension of social distancing and socialization and sociability is also not only the relations between individuals, it's not geometrical, it's also the individual and the nature as well. So it's not only about our nature as individual, but us and the nature, and how when we socialize, we gain more than just the relation with the person or the group we socialize with when we go out our homes, or even with our neighbors, but also that this experience, this situation is very complex and multi-layered. And what people miss is not only seeing friends, what people miss, or colleagues, but what people miss is basically going out. And out is not out of the door. Out means out of your solitude, out of your feeling on your own, alone, or sort of closed, lockdown in your own home, as if you were imprisoned in a way. Sometimes it's even, you cannot go out, not only because of the concerns, but because you can be fined, or you can be sometimes even arrested, because there is a policing dimension in the relation and in the social distance. It's filled with political factors and variables, also regarding the intrusion on people's privacy when it comes to fixation, etc. Part of our relation to the environment and to the world to the nature around us is going out and socializing, and this should not be undermined. We also feel the world around us by being sociable, and this is an element that we have been neglecting. And this is one of the blessings of the lockdown, that people started realizing more and more, I want to go to a garden, I want to see flowers, I want to see the spring. We are in spring now, by the way. I want to see the butterflies, I want to smell so and so. So the different senses and their important role in sociability matter beyond the technology and beyond the screens. I think that what happens off the cameras of media coverage of the lockdown, and to talk about how we would become more and more aware of the social distance, and we will be more and more not engaged in the same way, is challenged by many actions that are witnessed in many different societies. And you would assume that people with more passion, and who are more, into the collective relations of family, kinship relations, extended families, tribal relations, even in many countries, that they would be more inclined to engage and socialize in crowded gatherings in a way. This is not true. I mean, right from the early days of the lockdown in different Western countries, we saw people trying during the few hours that were allowed to them to go to the beaches or to sit in the parks. So this urge to socialize in the human soul is basically something that we need to consider and to look into. I think that the lessons of thinking about boundaries and limitations are also very important to look at, and how people are trying to readjust the boundaries of different relations and the spatial but also the relational dimensions that we started exploring and looking at. Last but not least is the political, which is basically our citizenship had developed, our relation with the state had developed beyond the legal, the participatory, the public sphere and the public space access, right to access the public sphere and public space, rights of travel and mobility, etc. Because technology also, as much as it affected our distance socializing and sociability, affected also our freedom. And I think that one of the dimensions that we should remember now, because we are sitting at home, related to technology, but related to freedom as well, and surveillance, and the right to the state to intrude to our privacies via the technology that we have, is basically our positioning. The notion of fixation and positioning and knowing where you are is a new concept. You can belong to a territory, an area, but the fact that I can spot exactly where you are via the global positioning systems of technology, the GPS, is increasingly becoming a way, while you are moving, to spot you and to know exactly where you are. Something that might be important to save your life sometimes, but also in some instances it is some sort of a way to control. And this technology is very important to bear and to bear in mind and take into consideration, because also it will affect very much our understanding of the self. There has been an interest recently, and some very interesting books have been published on how also places make up what we believe in. And being fixed in a space and place is a manner to basically form our understanding of the milieu, of the surroundings around us, and imagine ourselves via the GPS. You know, when someone asks you, where do you live? You don't anymore, when you say, I live in wherever neighborhood you live in. 50 years ago, you would be imagining the trees, the type and structure of buildings around you, the next door shop or the next door cafe, when you say, I live in such a place, or the areas around. I mean, in your imaginary, the map would be basically a lively map of your environment, of your area. Now, when you say, I live in this place, it is as if automatically there is a pin dropped on the cartographic map in your mind, on the heat map as well of the GPS. You know, I live in this place, and then the instant reaction would be, can you send me your location? And this affects very much actually the way we think about ourselves and space and distance. And I think it will have a lot to do later with imposing some regulations on us under the excuse that we want to protect you, we want to help you when you are not feeling well, we need to know who you mixed with in order to test them positive for corona or the coming pandemics, because these are cycles that we have been witnessing across history, but also across the last few decades. So positioning yourself and your localization is also important for our own understanding of how we started changing our perception of space and also of sociability, but also how we can be spotted based on our location to verify specific actions, etc. In such a situation, there has been concern. And I was attending a virtual seminar with the Room 2020 a platform to think about the future in the Mediterranean, and there were so many concerns by scholars from North Africa and from the Middle East regarding the future of the Arab Spring. We had a first wave, and then we had a second wave in different countries. The second wave was not in Egypt, Tunisia, but it was in Iraq, Lebanon, and Algeria, and Sudan. So using the pandemic to basically foster and pin these social distancing policies might lead to intimidating people who want to come together and demonstrate, for example, or marches demanding more freedom, etc. And this will definitely affect very much. It was a subject of concern for many analysts when it comes to the future of democratization, for example, in countries of the Middle East. A truce has been suggested by France, global peace truce for some period of time, to be able to focus and manage the pandemic. But at the same time, wars have been going on. Things deteriorated in Libya, in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen. It did not stop. Actually, the conflict is moving towards unpredictable stages. So how the countries that were basically supporting some wars in the region are asking for truce to focus on issues of health and fighting the pandemic, but also at the same time they are part and parcel of these conflicts in our region. These different levels actually affect very much the individual sociability and the individual understanding of distance and social distancing. It goes from the very macro to the very micro. It goes from the very personal, psychological to the very technological. So the topic is actually very broad. And I just wanted to draw attention to some of the dimensions that we usually overlook. And I think that what Sherry Turkle called for when she wrote a very interesting book calling for reclaiming the conversation, when she was analyzing how we are using different languages on the internet and in our social media, and our ability to conduct a proper conversation and to negotiate our relations is diminishing. I think this is a very important thing that we should focus on in the future. Habermas has a very interesting piece talking about technology as ideology, and how it's becoming in itself something that people cannot challenge. And though it's becoming crucial in this time of lockdown, I think it also brought into attention that it's not enough. It's important, but it's not sufficient, because human beings are not just yet another machine. No, human beings cannot be plugged into the relations via the social media only, and we need actually to see how this is affecting our life, and how more and more people now are appreciating the proximities in the relation that they enjoyed before, and being more alerted to dangers of proximities that they put up with for a long time, that were actually very negative in their impact on their psychology. So all of that comes to teach us more about our being as human beings and our becoming in workplaces, in the city, in society, in neighborhoods, in different circles. I think it's important, and we need more interdisciplinary research on that. And maybe when this lockdown is over, we would find researchers interested in looking at how people reconceptualized some of their sociabilities and social relations in terms of distancing and technology as well. Well, I can stop here and we can open the room for discussion and questions if you wish, Yumna.
Of course, thanks a lot for your fruitful and very interesting, as always, discussion about the whole topic. I mean, it's always, yani, you're interesting speaker for me. We have some questions. I will be dividing them into 3 by 3, so you can answer them. But yani, I will have one question. Which is, what you, as Dr. Heba, expect about the whole world after Corona? How the world will be, and how it should be. Yani, I mean, in terms of reality, and in terms of idealism. What we through what we learned from this coronavirus and lockdown and social distancing and everything, and what it will be in your opinion.
I'm not a fan of we are going to witness a completely different world, because so many things that we are talking about now have been existing, but the pandemic actually might accelerate the speed of some changes, especially from the political powers. Yani that the governments are now changing laws already in Egypt and in other third world countries. They are already changing laws. Laws have been issued during these 2 months related to curbing public freedom, intruding into privacy of people, changing the boundaries of the definitions of the boundaries of and the borders. Very interesting, very interesting to read a statement made by the Attorney General in Egypt regarding the cases of human trafficking on TikTok and encouraging human trafficking, etc. We had a very famous case. A girl was arrested, but the statement that was made that now, this is the statement, it includes this sentence: now we don't have just the borders of the air and the ground, we also have and the water, we also have the borders of the cyberspace. So it is opening the door for the state to intrude into the cyberspace. Of course, there are crimes committed, but at the same time, there are also potential crimes that can be committed by governments. So this is not new. It's just the acceleration of the speed. And speed is very important in understanding politics. It's timing and speed are very important. And I think that this was a good opportunity for plans to be introduced to reality because of the pandemic, and using this liquid fear that we are witnessing everywhere by people. But also it's very amazing that people themselves showed that they are very resilient in many communities. I don't believe in the notion of the lazy native, that citizens are stupid, the majority are not aware of the dangers. I mean, you need to understand, either they are going out because they need to work, they have a daily income that they need to work to secure, or they actually are considering social distancing as more risky than the virus. And this does not mean that they are stupid. This means that they are extremely sensitive to socialization, to sociability. They're very sensitive. And if they exchange visits, they might say, I have friends who exchanged visits 2 days ago. Someone invited the friends to iftar, and others were like, what iftar? We are talking about a virus, a pandemic, what are you doing? And they said, enough is enough. I mean, I'm willing to take the risk of being in any situation, but I cannot anymore stay at home. I cannot anymore be so distant. And this means something. These people are not stupid. They are stupid from the approach of pure rationality, if you calculate. But I'm not encouraging people to go out and not be careful. They kept social distance, etc. But what I'm saying is there is a message here about the human self, about the human nature. So we are not going to witness a completely different world after the pandemic, but an increase in some trends. And it's impossible for one person to describe the world after the pandemic or the world in the coming 20 years. I mean, there is no way that one can describe that. But definitely accelerating speed in curbing freedoms and curbing a lot of human and individual accessibility to different, even freedom, access to information. There are so many things that we don't know how the strategies are, specifically the plans regarding health services, etc., and public policies. We don't have already access to many of them. So especially in the Middle East, I think this will just increase, and the states will have, the regimes will have an excuse. When it comes to engagement, and I think the opposite, I think that human beings are capable always of this adaptability that we talked about. They are capable of coming up with solutions and of ways to maneuver and to adapt to new situations. And I think that as much as there is a political control tendency, there is also the tendency to, and people have to come up with different, you cannot expect that we will have an uprising like the 2011 one, or we will continue business as usual when it comes to social dissent, or even on the social media and how people basically bond and network. I am not pessimistic, nor am I a person who can anticipate the future, but I think that the main trends will continue. The economic dimension will be disastrous. It has been anticipated that 50 million people will lose their jobs. The recent statistics actually raised that to 200 million. So if we will have eventually 200 million people losing their jobs everywhere in this world, it will affect societies immensely. And I think that we have to go beyond the associational charity approach, to a more thinking and reflecting about how to actually support political demands of the right to the city and the right to the state in a different manner. How can we do that? I'm not sure that different political groups are still ready for the new conditions. That's it.
Okay, Dr. Hiba. Now I will start having 3 questions by 3. First question from Dr. Sami. He is asking, what do you think would be the long-term effects or impact, whether positive or negative, on the family unit and interactions, privacy, educational system, politics, and society in general?
I think the impact will be asymmetric. It will not go into one direction, because I drew many of my observations actually from my experience, even in my political studies. I start with observing, and then I go to the literature, and then I do my academic research. I mean, it doesn't come as a revelation, or I don't follow a specific agenda. It's just my concerns turn into my academic agenda. So asymmetry is very important to take into consideration. And if you look around you, yourself, Dr. Sami, happy to be talking to you, you will find that on one hand, some bonds started becoming stronger. I mean, in my case, my bonds with my children became stronger because during the 2 months, everyone is calling to see how everything is going. And then we started having conversation. And then at the beginning shouting, oh, you're just doing your own stuff like usual. Are you going to ask about this and that? The kids usually blame mothers for being intruding, etc. And then we started developing the conversation further. After 2 months, things are fine. We sorted out some even old, because, you are locked down, all the memories come back. And they blame you for things, that happened 20 years ago, and if it didn't happen, I would have been in a different situation, blah, 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 blah. But eventually, it sorted out itself good, alhamdulillah. But in other situations, the number of messages I usually receive messages on my Messenger and WhatsApp, people asking for advice, etc., because of some of the da'wah activities that I do sometimes. So the number of people who want to get divorced is skyrocketing. So I understand what you're saying, Dr. Sami. There are problems. Of course, maybe they will calm down when things are over. This is just the peak of it, and then when the lockdown is over, people will just settle a bit. But it's disturbing. I think that we realized in many families, especially those who have little children, when men stayed at home. I have many friends, middle-aged, and they started saying, I never discovered my children before. I didn't have any conversation. Go to your bed, eat your food, what did you do at school? So parenting might witness actually a boom. I'm optimistic about that, as much as there are violence cases, domestic violence, but in many cases, according to my observations, so many men started cooking. So many men that I know started cooking, whether bachelor students started learning how to cook and asking for recipes from their mothers, etc. And sometimes even some of them came a bit late to the Zoom classes because they say, or left early because they say, I have to cook. So it was very funny. But at the same time, redefining the relations in homes and the boundaries of privacy were renegotiated. And some people realized that they were too much, to themselves, and they started exploring, building new relations with family members, and some discovered that they don't want anymore because it's like it went into a crisis. Social relations cannot be predicted in a symmetric way. And I think that it depends very much on so many variables: the willingness of people to negotiate their relations, the social class, the situation, whether this family unit now will be subject to financial crisis because of the unemployment and the layoff of some people, family members who are working, whether women or men. There are so many circumstances. One cannot judge. Family generally, in the situation, in the modern condition, has been challenged because of modernization and more focus on rationalization than emotional dimensions, and Zygmunt Bauman has great work on that, and others as well in sociology of the family. So it might accelerate, or it might actually witness an embetterment in this regard. I think at the end there is no determinism. It depends very much on what the choices people make. And even under circumstances that build trends, people still have a say and still have a will. This is what I believe. So we can shift the trend, and we can introduce new variables into the scene. So I am optimistic. I think that more good will come out of that than bad, personally, from my observation.
Yeah, of course. I need only to comment over knowing about children. Even for myself, I feel like it's the first time that I'm really having. Also, I'm a part-timer. I'm not a full-timer, but it was the first time to stay for the whole week with my child. It's really different, really interesting, and even cooking is not only for men. It's also for women. I start cooking.
I know how hard mothers experience such tough time because they were doing everything, especially working mothers were doing. If they were doing things from home, it was much more difficult for them than men doing work from home. But it also is a very interesting experience, and I think, yes, as you said, it builds bonds. I have a colleague and a student who just finished her PhD during the lockdown, and she has been staying with two girls alone because her husband is abroad, and of course her parents cannot come and help. And she has been with her two girls who are 1 year and 5 years for 2 months alone, locked. And she just, at the beginning she was very nervous, and then eventually she just, started making up a schedule for every day, and that's it. I think it will be a good experience, even for the memory of those who are locked with their parents. If the fathers were around for a long time, they must have built a lot of memories as well. So every event, every new condition brings both potentials.
Yeah, of course. I will have other 3 questions here. First question from Tangnoor: how COVID-19 has transformed the term social responsibility of citizens toward state and each other? Second question: as much as it is distant socializing for people who have access to technology, it is still social distancing for those who have limited or no access. I think he's asking, it's anonymous. I don't know who is sending this question. the last question, to meet virtually is essentially an intimate experience in terms of direct conversation and providing the other access to our personal spaces. In the post-isolation world, will all those boundaries be possible to bring back after those intimate conversations have already broken down these barriers? So then we will have other 3 questions.
I think social responsibility is very important, and as I said, societies have shown resilience. And at the very moment where everyone was panicking, many people actually started initiatives. We had an initiative at the very beginning of the lockdown in Egypt amongst young people that they started offering on social media. They started saying where they live, and they said if someone is living alone, an old person living alone, I'm volunteering to go and shop for them and drop the things at their home. So it became like a small movement, and we also had people starting to collect money and look for the needy workers who work day by day, those who work, a great segment of those who used to serve at home servants, for example, did not work because they were locked themselves. So, and they live day by day basically on what they get every day. So in many situations, people started networking and collecting money for those who are in the neighborhood or in the area who work day by day and lost their income, and providing them with food, providing them with a daily compensation for the daily income, etc. And then it became, because of that pressure, and this is also showing how social responsibility can have a political effect. Of course, the government, any government, does not want the society to depend on itself, because it's very empowering. If we can depend on ourselves, this will show the inability of the state to basically come up with the best solutions. So it was hijacked. The initiative was hijacked from civil society, basically. Still, civil society is working on that, especially in Ramadan. But the state established about 5 weeks ago, in the case of Egypt, because I'm following closely the situation, of course, because I'm Egyptian citizen. Started the program, launched a program to compensate with a minimum income those who used to be workers without contracts or workers by daily work. So social responsibility introduces energy into society, and that is actually taken, and the momentum is gained somehow, and governments cannot ignore that. And that's why I say that the human will matters. Never give up and say, who would care or who would join, or no. People all the time, societies across human history, the adaptability and the ability to invent solutions for problems and to come up with initiatives are very important to remember. Many people don't have access. Of course, we are not the world. Those who are sitting on the internet, we have to remember that billions of people don't even have the basic minimum for quality of life. So it's also it's like a bell, it's like a whistle blow. It's reminding us that we have to think about those who missed on many things during the pandemic, and how to provide people with the minimum to express themselves, to have a voice, to have a decent life, etc. If I understood the question correctly. How isolation would affect intimate relations and how we can rebuild the conversation. This is again related to the importance of silence. When you are locked down with a person, the best way when things are tense to be silent. Silence is far better than saying things that you would regret later, broadly, generally. So I think that it's not only about the conversation, it's also about how to be silent. We have, by the way, a student, a Moroccan student. She is writing her PhD at Medit on silence and the importance of silence philosophically, sociologically, etc. So there is always a hope. We saw in our own lives cases where people actually did so many injustices to each other, and there was no way that we could imagine that they would basically become friends again, or be after long years of divorce, they would just go back to each other again, and it happened. Human beings are amazing. So I think that it just needs good intentions and learning something from the crisis and from the dilemmas people go through, and the willingness and openness to learn new things, to learn how to negotiate, to go take a course in well-being, to manage your anger, to manage your memories, etc. So I think that, again, we need to invest in our sociabilities, because they are not just random, or they are not just given. There are so many skills that we have to learn in our social life, and sometimes we learn them by force when things happen, like a pandemic or a lockdown like that. It's more preferable, more decent to learn them by choice.
Okay, Dr. But relating to what you have just speak about the daily workers, there is one question here about, is the luxury of isolation available for all groups, like daily workers, engineers, like those who need to be in locations? Also, there are other two questions which is somehow related. One from Dr. Sami. Please elaborate on the harmful effects of technology and how they could be minimized. Another question also, if you can
you repeat that, Jumna?
Okay.
The impact of technology?
Yeah, effects of technology and how they could be minimized.
Okay.
Also another question about the effects, but if you can elaborate on the psychological effects of social distancing.
Isolation is not avoidable for people who have to work. Yes, I understand that. I know that people cannot afford to stay at home. But at the same time, because of the economic situation, many segments in society will be, on the long run, isolated from the mainstream minimal quality of life as well. So we will witness a different isolation in terms of becoming invisible, becoming useless and becoming invisible. That is something that Yuval Harari referred to when he was talking about the useless. We will witness a huge number of millions of people because of introducing artificial intelligence, etc. So some people could not afford isolation. Of course, they had to socialize under risk, and definitely this entailed a lot of anxiety. This is a different anxiety than that witnessed by those who were locked down. But at the same time, my concern is that it's not the isolation but the invisibility of more and more people when they go into poverty, dire poverty. And we should take somehow, as societies and as governments, preemptive actions. We are witnessing it's starting now. Already the layoff has been going on, and the reduction of salaries has been going on. So I think a lot of social work needs to be done once things go back to the new normal. The impact of technology, I think number one is awareness, and technology cannot only be ideology, so that if you say limit the number of hours you use technology, for example, etc. We are not calling for rejection of new inventions or updated technology, but it's the commodification and also the reification. The commodification of the relations that come with sometimes with the sweeping consumerism, and also the turning social relations into commodities. And this was discussed in social psychology and in psychology and in sociology at large, in a lot of studies and writings and research. So how to keep technology useful for the purposes it is for, and how to protect people from the dangers of breach of privacy, control, etc. Of course, there are now, everyone has come across the conspiracy theories that they are going to inject in our bodies, these chips, and we are going to be controlled completely. Of course, this has been going on, the concern has been going on for so long time. A lot of writings have anticipated that in terms of novels, Aldous Huxley and others, and but also we have proof that this is starting, but in the corporate world, putting chips so that you need to open the door, you don't need to get out the card, etc. But whether this is going to be generalized as a policy, I don't think that it will pass so easily, with more awareness of the issues of privacy that were breached during the coronavirus. There has been I think in China, of course it's very obvious, but also in Israel, they have announced that they are using some technology from the military sector to basically secure citizens and make sure about their location, and infiltrating the location settings in the mobiles of citizens. So this is a big thing. I mean, I don't think that people will just let it go. And there is more and more awareness that there is a limit to the fear, to this liquid fear spread by the governments, because people are aware of what is going on. And the good thing about such internet technology and the World Wide Web is that there are initiatives coming up to teach you how to secure your own devices, etc. So people will have to learn that as well. I mean, I'm not at all a technology person, but I started following the steps because they said that the new version of Facebook application entails spotting offline activities, and it was circulating everywhere how to go through the steps: open your mobile, go to the settings, do this, do that, and turn it off, so that Facebook has no access to your extra or Facebook activities. So I think people will need to learn a little bit some tricks to stop some of the malaises of intrusion, etc. And regarding the ethics, people should know. I mean, one of the things that might sound a bit funny, Yumna, is when we started having the mobiles. This was the beginning of the millennium. My mobile, I think we started it in Egypt 1999, having mobile phones, etc. And I was very intimidated when I would go to see what my children are doing in the room, and they would be online at 12 and 1 o'clock. And I would say to them, I mean, who are you talking to? It was mobile phone. I mean, the internet and the World Wide Web was not that developed at that time, but mobile phone. And they would say, I'm talking to my friend. We're just, revising or going through the homework or something like that. I said, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. And they would say, so? I said, Abe, you shouldn't be talking. This is like, I mean, I was thinking in spatial terms, like as if we are visiting someone at 1 o'clock in the morning. And when when I forget to turn off my mobile and there is a notification at 3 o'clock in the morning, I feel like, who is sending? It might be a very important message, for example, or circulating news about tomorrow's meeting or something, but like, no, you should find a timer. You don't send a message at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's like, but of course, what I say now is completely irrational, because people would say, why didn't you switch off your mobile phone, and we are free to send, because tomorrow at 9 there is something urgent, etc. So we have access to everyone. And there are ethics related to that. Of course, the dimension of privacy, our relation, coming back to the beginning of the question of family. To which extent do we have the right to set rules in our home regarding use of technology and use of like Netflix or whatever, We have to think about it, and we have to negotiate, and we have to explain to ourselves and to our social circles why we are calling for so and so. And you'll find definitely all the time people who oppose it, say, no, this is against freedom of expression, etc. And especially parenting groups are more and more becoming influential, because no, it's not about that. It's also about little children who don't have yet the ability to judge what they are seeing, etc. And there should be some sort of filtering for that. So a lot of things related to the ethics of use of the technology, let alone, of course, the technology. If you go into bioethics, it's a completely different topic to talk about. I mean, I cannot expand on that. I think the last question was on the dimensions of psychology, the social impact, the psychological impact.
Psychological effects.
I mean, it depends very much on people. You know, some people are doing fine with the lockdown. Some people are just going crazy. Some people are falling into depression. Some people are becoming anxious. Some people came out of anxiety. Yani, I know people who were anxious before the lockdown, and with the lockdown, this was for them very good. Depends on whether a person is introvert or extrovert or ambivert or whatever. You know, we have different types and shades and on the continuum. So the psychological is very. People need to know how to be resilient, and I think personally that there is a big deal related to faith here, because I believe personally that religion is important. One of the things, for example, regarding the impact of our times on the future of our situation, there will be definitely changes in the understanding of the religious. The religious realm will be affected. On one hand, in the Islamic world, we had fatwas starting to be issued regarding can we follow the sheikh in the next door mosque in prayers because we are deprived from going to the mosque. And there has been disagreement between the scholars. Some said, no, you cannot. You can hold your own jama'ah at home. So what is the reason to follow from a distance? And some said, if you are alone or if there is a need, you can follow. I mean, there has been a disagreement on that. And more technology will be posing questions to the religious mind and the jurist mind to give more. And I was just talking to some group yesterday on Zoom, and I was saying we shouldn't be actually within the scholarly circles of either very much into the mainstream Islamic studies, but also as Muslims who are thinking and reflecting and discussing and debating. We shouldn't be waiting for the technology to be invented and fall over our head and then look for a fatwa. This is insane. Because we should have sort of preemptive and futuristic perspectives regarding phenomena and outcomes and implications before they happen, and we can see them. And we already have the fiqh for that. We have the ability to engage in that. But unfortunately, this schizophrenia between social sciences and Islamic sciences is there. But what is interesting, for example, that the Pope Francis of the Vatican, because of the lockdown, he said that, okay, now you cannot come to the churches, the Christians cannot go to churches to confess. So you can confess directly to God. Oh, really? Seriously? This is very interesting. So when I read it, I said, this is going to be a real shift, because if you can confess directly to God, why don't you confess directly to God every day? And that's it. It will affect the hierarchies in the church on the long run. Of course, believers will just run to churches when this is over. I mean, I would run to the mosque. I can understand the heart of a person with faith. But there are shifts going on. Either they go into positive or negative directions. And when I was asked, one of the scholars, Islamic scholars, was just taking the opinions of others to understand more the phenomena, and he asked me, what do you think about praying from a distance? I said to him, number one, this is not new. The question was posed before. When I was for a few years, I was one of the co-founders of Islam Online, a big Islamic website that was functioning till 2009, 1999 to 2009, and then it faced some problems, and it's now much more minimal. It's still online, but much more minimal scope. We were asked about in the fatwa section about, can I follow the Imam in the Kaaba if I am in the 30th floor in a big hotel overlooking the Kaaba in Umrah or Hajj? And it's like, this has been asked before, by the way, because people, but not in pandemic, but because people who were too wealthy were too lazy to go down and pray in the row. So and some other people said, because we are asking for the grandfathers who are too old, can they enjoy when they can still, when the sound of the mics from the Haram Sharif reaches them, can they follow? And there were debates at the time regarding, if you cannot go, can you do that in old age, or if you are sick or whatever, but it's not applicable to everyone. Some scholars said no completely. So there are things that will start developing related to technology, psychology, sociability, and understanding of faith and understanding of self. And I don't think that scholars should be intimidated to say yes to everything because it just is possible. And they should look for the future social, psychological, and political implications when they are, making their considerations.
This religious chapter is very interesting for me, really. And also we have another question which is somehow related to these kind of shifts that we got to witness. Here Taimur is asking, as we are expecting new normal after the first wave of COVID-19, are we also expecting new culture? Because in every religion and ethnicity, congregation is basic ingredient of their identity, whether it's religious or cultural, like Eid congregations, Shia's mothering congregations, and Nuruz congregations. How this pandemic has impacted the contemporary cultures, specifically in the Muslim world. Also, the last question I have here, to be also concluding with, Dr. Heba, if you have a comment over the home violence percentage that we are hearing about these nowadays because of coronavirus, do you really believe that it's related to people feeling isolated, or they are because of their lockdown at home, or maybe it's more highlighted because of the environment, and it was existed already in every country, and it was more highlighted. So.
Yeah, I think that the problems became visible. So what people used to maneuver to ignore is now visible. So this is one of the things. But also, as I said, some good things came with that. And each and every domain should be addressed by the respective circle. So if the circle is a circle of associations of mediation or family counseling, etc., then they should focus on the violence. If the activities are related to more positive sort of engagement with families and providing them with tools and skills, then they should focus on the positive side, etc. So there isn't a specific trend here. I'm very careful about the notion of new normal because it has been circulating, everybody has been talking about. And because I work in conceptual analysis, basically, I'm a political theorist, and my main issues are concepts and how they develop and how the semantic field changes, etc. And then what the implications are sociologically. This is my passion to work on sociology. So I'm careful about giving us a concept and then circulating it, and the concept itself becomes the new normal of the concept. So as if anything will happen now, they will say, well, this is the new normal, you have to accept it. I mean, this is the new normal. Oh, you want us to go back to the previous stages? No. After the pandemic, this is the new normal. No, this is not the new normal. Some things will become new normal, and some things will be put on the platform or the vehicle of new normal to be normalized. And I think people should be very careful. I actually prefer the notion of Ziauddin Sardar, the post-normal, because there has been an interruption, but also we should not exaggerate, because usually things are, there is somehow like introducing concepts and then policies. And I will not normalize with something that undermines human dignity, undermines human will, undermines social bonds, undermines my religious notions and my religious belief. So it might not be normal. It might be just introducing things under this. So I think that the new normal in the congregation will not differ, because we have Sharia. When it comes to prayers in the Muslim case, for example, you should be next to each other. You're not doing that, and you're keeping like this safe distance somehow in different mosques that allowed people to pray. And even in I think in Bosnia, they use the outer gardens in the mosques so that people can have more room and more space to mine this sort of distance. But at the end of the day, this remains a state of exception, and it should not be used by the state to legitimize a state of exception imposed by the state on spaces of worship, because spaces of worship, especially in Muslim countries, especially in the Middle East, are also spaces of dissent. I mean, the uprisings came on the peak of the Egyptian uprising was during Jummah, because people come together in the mosque, and then it's a demonstration in making once they come out. So we have to be a bit careful that nobody legitimizes illegitimate practices and regulations under this new normal assumption. Yeah. I think that's it. I'm not mistaken.
Also, we are running out of time. Thanks for your participation, and thanks for your really fruitful